is Ted Raw, and I'm an alcoholic. And I usually end like this, but I was thinking tonight, watching all the people here, I love being sober, and that's why I can come here. And I wanted to say that because there's a lot of sobriety here, and there's some new sobriety here. And when I first got here, they used to say, I think John remembers the meeting he used to go to, they'd say, who got up first this morning? And whenever it was, I got up at 3:10, and you have the most sobriety. And they lived one day at a time. And when I came here, it was, for me, it was 1 minute at a time, 1 second at a time. And I'll tell you as I go along, but I tried to kill myself, I think, with alcohol. And I was hopeless when I got here. Pardon me. I used up all my hope. So when I got here, I began to look at the meetings and say, they've got something, but I don't know what it is, and I want it. And so what I wanted to start out with, too, is that we always read the preamble, but I wonder if we listen to it. And I know that everyone reads it with heart, but one of the things that hooked me when I got here was, it said that Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other. And I had no hope. My experiences were killing me, and I didn't know how to stop. And I looked around the rooms, and I have my sponsor, I'll tell you about him later, but it was a man of words. He loved dictionaries, so we go to meetings, and Bill would always open up a dictionary when we started and say, okay, this word means this and that. And one of the things he told me was, he said, fellowship is people of a like mind. And so when I was looking around the room at everyone, it's like, okay, there's a promise in this for me. More than just, I'm in a meeting. These people want to stay sober, and they want to help me stay sober, and they want to help me live. And I know that's not even promises in the book, but I took that as a bond when I got here, that you really want to help me. And these people did. I mean, the hand of AA is a hug as much as it is a hand. And you know that. How many times does somebody just give you a hug because they look at you and say, you don't look right, you don't look happy, give me a hug. And that was all new to me. And I come from a place that was a little more rougher than that. And not that my family didn't hug, but the men in my family were stoic. How's that? They were John Wayne's. And so I was taught at one point in my life that if you get in a fight, we'll be angry, but you better finish it. So there's two messages there. One, don't fight, but if you fight like that. So when I got here, there's this gentleness, this hope that floats in AA that I just grabbed onto. I loved it. And to this day, looking around here, I know a lot of you, and but there's a lot of you I don't know. But I feel like there's a bond between us because we all want that same common thing. We want to live well, we want to give up on the alcohol, and we want to have a good life, and we want love. And I felt that here. So I'm going on script a little bit. When I was looking around the room, it's like the first time I was at this meeting, it's been a long time since I felt the feeling that you have here. There's an undercurrent of excitement and something that I haven't felt in AA in a long time. And not that it's not at other meetings, but I think I'm used to, the meeting I go to right now, I've gone to for 23 and a half years. And I know the people, I'm looking around the room, there's a lot of them from that meeting, and I love them and they love me. But there's a life in a new meeting like this that you don't feel sometimes in old meetings. And I want you to remember that, because that's the thing that will keep you sober. It'll keep you coming back. And I was telling my wife was not with me when I was drinking. And so there's times that she'll look at me and say, have you been to a meeting lately? and she senses that, or knows that, this is where I belong. You understand me. She's not a drinker. She's someone that can have a glass of wine and drink half the glass and put it away. I'm like, why would you do that? So even now, after all these years, it's like, okay, how do you do that? So I come here to be revived. And anyway, thank you for that. So let me get started here. So we talk about experience, strength, and hope. My experience, I grew up in a small town, just like Mason, St. John's, it's 40 miles north of here. Same size, same sort of thing, kind of like Smallville. Everybody knew everyone, probably everybody in town, 2/3 of the other people, and were aware of the other third. And it was one of those communities where everyone raised their children. My children were your responsibility and yours were mine. And I'm sure Mason's like that. My family was a small family. My mother and father had been married 15 years when I was born. They'd gone through the Depression, and I don't know that they were really interested in having a family. Both of them had lost their parents young and helped raise families. When I came along, they were very happy that I was there. Right after the war, my dad had been in the Marine Corps. When they came home, Ted happened. And I was just before my 5th birthday, my father died. And so left my mother and I alone. My father was the undersheriff in Clinton County. And the deputies kind of took me under their wing and kind of raised me. In my family, alcohol was very prevalent. No one thought about it. We did nothing without alcohol being there. It was just a given. I remember on occasion somebody getting drunk, but they drank so much that you just didn't necessarily recognize it. My mother, because of her condition, was depressed, and she used alcohol to treat her depression. And so, and while I was growing up, she was hospitalized a couple of times, and my family took me in. Some of the people who have used with me know that there were times that my mother was so sick that I would beg them to do something, and they wouldn't and would leave me with her. So as we get into the 4th step, I had a big resentment for my family. And so I am a loner by nature. Trusting people is very difficult for me, even now. And so for me to say how much I love to share with you, and I love the warmth that you show me, something is very difficult for me, even now, after all these years. And so I appreciate the ability to do that. And you taught me that. I didn't know that when I got here. But anyway, my mother loved me dearly. My aunts and uncles, because they had the same problem, I think probably they were afraid to help her because they didn't want to face their own problem. So, back to me. I was active in sports. I was a good student. I wrestled, played football, threw the shot, which is, that's not a skilled sport. Got a scholarship at the University of Toledo to play football, but I didn't. And we look at the book, and the book says, well, drinking is just a symptom of our alcoholism. And I think that looking back, I couldn't follow things through. And so when I got that scholarship, I didn't want it. And so I ended up getting a Scholastic scholarship to Western I went there. Why I tell you this is because I had never drank when I was in high school because of the sports. My family drank. The alcohol was always available. Kids my age from 7 up. I mean, how many of you have done that? Your family says, well, if you want a sip of beer, take a sip of beer, don't get drunk. If you want to taste the wine, taste the wine. And I know that's common in some families. So I would taste it, but I wasn't interested in it. And I think I was afraid of it because of my family's history. But when I went to Western, it just was a different world. I was on my own. Nobody was telling me what to do. And I met some real partners. The shame of it was that I was in honors college. And so my grades were good enough to get me into honors college. Many times when you go to college, you've got to earn your way in. My grades were good enough that they accepted me. And the only class that I attended was ROTC. The rest of the classes, I would show up. I showed up to one final in my last term there, and the professor asked me who I was. And anyway, so you can see that I wasn't interested in college. So this is during the 60s, 1967. Some of you probably weren't even born then. But the war was raging at that time. So people were trying to go to college to avoid the war. I dragged my way into the war, so I got drafted. I thrived in the Army. I liked the discipline. I liked the camaraderie. And I liked the passes and we would just get ripped. And I thought that's a good way to live. After basics, I was assigned to infantry training. And I don't know if any of you have been in the infantry, but the infantry considers themselves the Army. The rest of you are support troops. And we party. And that's not an insult to the rest of you, but that's how you survive in the infantry. So I, again, thrived. I went to NCO school, came out as a staff sergeant. Some of you don't know what that is probably, but that's three stripes and a rocket underneath. You've seen them. And I had less than a year in the Army when I was promoted. So, like I said, I thrived. Went to Vietnam. I was a squad leader, then promoted to platoon sergeant. And many times I acted as the acting first sergeant. I liked the Army. But with the infantry, if you had a spare moment, you were in the bar. And that's where Ted was. When I got out of the Army, I worked at Oldsmobile for a while. Some of you don't know what that was, but that used to be a car. And if you got one, it's probably worth it. Worked there for a while, but I told you I was raised by cops, so I had to try it. So I joined the police department. The police department seemed to have some power over me that I didn't drink. Now, don't get me wrong, I would go to parties occasionally and get drunk, but it seemed to curb my drinking. And I can't explain it, but it could be because I didn't want to be embarrassed. I didn't want to, who knows? I'm not a psychologist. But I thrived on the police department, and I did all kinds of things. But anyway, what the problem was is right about the time I was getting ready to retire, I realized that what I was doing is I would go to work, come home, and I was planning my drinking. And I think it scared me. And so when it was time for me to retire, I pulled the pin. I had seen others embarrassed. There's some retired officers here, and I'm seeing them all like this. We saw officers that the departments didn't help them. They saw it come, but they've lost their jobs because of that. They see a lot, and they medicate with alcohol. I'm not excusing them, but that's what they do. And yet there's other jobs that do that too. But anyway, when I retired, I pulled the pin, but I also pulled the cork. And about a year or so after I retired, I ended up having alcoholic seizures. And bad enough, and my wife, my late wife, didn't recognize what it was, so she transported me to the hospital. When I got to the hospital, there was an ambulance crew there that recognized me from the fire department and said, he's not sick, he's drunk. And I think that's when it clicked with my wife. And so, anyway, I had my first AA experience in the emergency room. And if I cry, it's because it really was touching to me. I was in the emergency room, my wife was there, my kids were there. I have an adopted, not legally an adopted son, but a son that I helped raise. Marcus worked at the hospital. Marcus came in, and I can remember him holding my head saying, "Oh, Pops, oh, Pops." And I said, "I'm sorry, man, but I can't explain it." And he said, "We'll get you some help." And he, my son, asked the doctor if there was something he could do for me. The doctor essentially said, "Stick it in your ear, you're a drunk and I don't want anything to do with it." There was a nurse there, and the doctor walked out, and this nurse walked up to me. She held my hand and opened it, and she put a coin in my hand and closed it. And she said, "I've been sober for 17 years. You don't have to die, and you're gonna. You were this close to death. And you and I both know it's because you drank yourself to death, and you don't have to die." And I said, I don't know how to stop it. She says, "I have," and she's rubbing that coin in my hand. She said, "I have the solution, if you'll only take it." And I was so scared and so hopeless, I did. And anyway, excuse me, but that was my first experience with power greater than me. And so, to tell you the story, I did not see that woman again, and didn't know who she was, and I tried to find her. So, I'll finish with this, another experience, and that was, I was in a meeting and I mentioned this, and a woman in the meeting says, "I know that nurses, and I know where she is right now, and would you like to meet her?" I said I would. So I went to meet her, and she said, "You know how many times I've reached out to someone and gave them a coin or handed them a coin, and I never knew I ever helped anyone." And so she said, "Thank you." But anyway, about a year and a half or so later, I had 17 years sober, and I had found out she lost her 17-year coin, so I got a chance to give her a coin in a meeting. And we both cried. So anyway, friends were criers. So you know, with me, in my life, I wasn't going to cry because of all the situations that I was in growing up. And so for me to cry has been a gift. To let my emotions out, to let you see who I am has been a gift. And I'm not going to stop. So here we go. So anyway, I ended up in rehab at St. Lawrence. I don't even know if they still do that. But at St. Lawrence Hospital, my blood alcohol was 0.44 when I got there. So I assumed, because I was in the emergency room for a while, and if you know, at 0.50, that's death. Everything shuts down. I must have been somewhere close to that. But anyway, so I was in a coma for about 3 or 4 days, and it was induced so that they could deal with me. And I remember things in that coma. One, Vietnam kept going through my head, and which is, it just does. But anyway, I had conversations with my mother, and I remember, and I know it's in my head, but I remember my mother saying that you could not believe that I was an alcoholic, and you're an alcoholic. Okay? So anyway, I went through rehab, and at the end of rehab, they said, if you don't have a sponsor, you can't leave. Now, everybody knows that's not true, but I was so scared and so desperate that you could tell me anything and I'd do it. So I went to a meeting on a Sunday morning, afternoon, and a man walked in with his wife and sat down. My second experience with a higher power. on my hat, I have my pin, but I belong to the Americal Division in Vietnam, and unless you were in Vietnam, you'd have no idea what the Americal Division is. It's the 23rd Infantry. But it's the only named division in the Army. Only division that was ever named. They all have nicknames. This was officially the Americal Division. It stands for Americans in New Caledonia. It was formed in the Second World War. Anyway, this man walked in and said, "Hey, America." Well, I was like, okay. Nobody knows that. I mean, everybody knows the 101st, the 73rd Herd, the 1st Division. I mean, I can name all these people are going like that don't know anything about the military, but nobody knows the America. I said, how do you know the America? Well, he said, you know, I was in the America in 1968 and 69. I said, really? I was in the America in 1968 and 69. He said, really? Well, we must have chewed some of the same dirt. It was time for the meeting to start, so that someone sitting there said, Bill, would you, this is Bill, I'm Bill W., I'm not that old yet. He says, Bill, would you chair the meeting? And Bill says, yeah, I'll chair the meeting. So he chaired. So afterwards, I said, could I talk to you? And I said, I'm looking for a sponsor. And he said, well, I'll tell you what, I don't sponsor people that are in rehab, because I don't want to interfere with their program. But if you call me every day when you get out, come talk to me. So Bill became my sponsor. So my point to this is, later, I mean many years later, we're talking and I said, you know that meeting you chaired? I said, you saved my life. He said, you know, I got to tell you this, but I had never been to that meeting before. Bonnie and I went to church. Got out of church, Bonnie said, let's go to lunch and we'll go home. He said, you know, I said to Bonnie, and I'm quoting, I need a meeting today. Let's go to the club. End of story. So Bill was my sponsor until he died about a year ago. I say sponsor. He was my friend, my brother, and I love him, and I miss him. But he was one of those men that I met that said, I will give you what I got, but you got to take it. I will do anything I can to give you the information, but you got to take it. And if you go back out, I'll say, what a damn shame, but it won't be me, and I'll be back here when you get here. And that hurt me at first. And as time's gone on, I realized that man loved me back to sobriety. He was not going to give me a crutch. You either do it or you don't. You either want it or you don't. Now that sounds kind of cold because the man he had a big love in him. But he knew that I had to take it and do it myself. So, and that's, you know, that's how I started in AA. So when I got out of rehab, we started into the program. And so he was an old-timer in that you do the program. There was no delays. We worked on the program, and I was probably done, not in a week like Bill W. and those guys did, probably a month. And it was very intense. He wasn't fooling around with it. And when we would get ready, he'd move on. And there was no, well, I want to think about it. He'd say, you know, what we need to do then is talk. We need to pray. So that was my introduction to AA. The other thing that Bill believed in was community, and this is a community. But I have a community of men right now, I can start pointing, right around here sitting, and a community of women that I can go to at any time. I had a sponsor, and I had some trusted friends, but there's a community to AA that if you're new, I want you to look at that and join that. That's going to be your support, okay? So I hadn't been in the program more than a year, I think, and John, you were still in the meeting at that time. I don't know if you remember, my son was involved in a near-fatal accident. It took him about 2 hours to pry him out of a car that he was in an induced coma. I felt sorry for the police officer that came to the door and knocked on my door at 11 o'clock in the morning and at night and said, Ted, it was somebody I had trained, He said, Ted, I don't know if your son is alive or not. We just pried him out of the car, but you need to get to the hospital now. And so we got dressed and went. And when I got there, the doctor said, well, he's coded a couple times, but we think we've got him back. My point to this is the community. So about 2 or 3 days after Jeremy was in the hospital and we could see that he was starting to settle. So the kid had a major, his hips both were crushed because he was crushed in the car, and he had a head injury that was very severe. So he required a lot of time afterwards. But anyway, I got a phone call from Matt H. in this meeting that I'm in. And he said, so I'm calling to see how you're doing. How's it going? And I said, well, my son is this and that, and we gave him a thing. And Matt says to me, he says, Ted, that's all well and good. And we've been praying that the hospital would take care of your son. But I'm calling to check on you. This is a dangerous time for you. A very dangerous time. If you start drinking, you can't help your family. If you start drinking, you are no good to anyone. And you remember, if you start drinking, you die. So here's what I propose. Have you been to a meeting? Are you in contact with your sponsor? I said, my sponsor's been there every day. There's 2 people from our meeting that work at the hospital and they're there all the time. Yes, and I've been to a meeting. He said, well, here's the deal. I know you want to stay with your son. We'll bring the meeting to you. So if you want to have it in the room, you want to have it in the parking lot, you want to have it in my truck, I don't care where, but you need a meeting. You need to be with us, and we want you to know we love you. That's AA, brothers and sisters. That's the way I know AA. Okay. So over the years, I've done the same thing for people. Or we said, hey Fred, call so-and-so, and if they need a meeting, we'll take it to them. And that's just the way it works. Tom knows that, and we do that, okay? So, anyway, I started into the steps, and I'll run through the steps. I'm off script, if you haven't figured it out. I told John that was going to happen. So when we started working the steps, one of the things that when we got to step 1, well, so was my life unmanageable? I don't know, but I think if we took a vote, it would be about 100% right now. Blood alcohol, 4.4. Had no idea how I got to the hospital. Had no idea what was going on with me. People are reporting I said things. I had no idea for a week or so before. I must have been on a blackout for a week or 10 days. Was my life unmanageable? That was an easy one for me. What to do about it now might be a little more difficult, but it was unmanageable. So we get to step 2, which is, I got to read it now. Step 2 is came to believe that power greater than myself would restore me to sanity. Well, one of the things Bill said was, I was very active in the church. I've read in the big book, and if you've read it, you read, there's a point in there where they said, well, I believe in God, but I don't think God believed in me. And when I read that, it was like, holy smoke, they're talking to me. I realized that I was playing at believing in God. And I taught Sunday school, I sang in the choir, I was on the church board. I mean, I would tell you that I believed in God. And Bill said, you know what? Your God's not working for you. I said, what does that mean? He said, well, your God is not working for you. Here's what I want you to do. Use my God. He's working for me. And he said, if you look around the room, everybody in that room that you seem to think is doing well, their higher power is working for them, so you can borrow them. And then he said, what I want you to do and is this. In the morning, I want you to say, thank you, thank you. And at night, I want you to say, thank you. I don't want you to get into these big prayers or any of that stuff that you've learned in church. I just want you to say thank you. And I want you to do it on your knees. Well, I'll tell you what. That ain't going to happen. I'm not getting on my knees for any man, any woman. I'm not doing it. And he said, well, You told me that you would do anything in your power to get sober. So apparently you lied to me. Well, I don't think so. So anyway, he said, okay, I'll give it a try. And he said, I want you on your knees, and I want you to get on. So you can guarantee this. This was Simmons' idea. He said, take your shoes, kick them under the bed. And when you get down there and get your shoes, while you're there, pray. This is silly, but I'll do it. And I did. Well, I don't get on my knees as much as I should, but for about 22 years, I got on my knees every morning and every night. Because it became a habit. That's not for my higher power. That's for me. To say, you know what, I'm not in control. I'm down here because I want you to help me. What can I do to help me? So anyway, I got to the second step, and not with my God, but with our other God. To the third step, Bill said, this one's really easy. Are you going to turn your life over to a higher power? Come on, you got me with this getting down on your knees stuff. He said, no, I'm serious. He said, you need to turn your life over. Are you willing to do that? All you got to do is be willing. All you got to do is make the decision. You don't have to make a commitment. Just make the decision. Okay, I said, I guess I can make that decision. He said, no, guess is not what I'm asking. I need a yes or a no. Will you do that? Yes, I will. Fine. Let's move on to step 4. And I said, but Bill, he said, just listen to what I'm saying. This is your commitment. And it'll come. I promise you it'll come. It'll come to you like it came to me. It'll come to you like it came to everybody else. Just trust me. Okay, so I'll trust you. So we go to the 4th step. This is the one that, man, I'm telling you, was really difficult for me because, let me read it. You all know it, but let me read it anyway. Made a searching and fearless moral inventory. I'm moral. Apparently not. It's searching and moral inventory. Searching inventory. What does that mean? He said, I'm about to tell you. I'm the sponsor, you're the sponsee. Listen up. And listen, and it's like, okay. He said, in the book, there's a plan. And I want you to follow that plan. I'm going to help you with that plan. But I want you to follow that plan. And he said, I know you well enough now that you have some big resentments, but they're not resentments, they're hatred, and those are going to kill you. And he said, and you'll tell me the bravest thing walking, but you're a scared little boy. Now at this time, I told him to stick it in his ear. And he said, I want you to think about it. So we separated for that day. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, he's right. So I called him, and I said, you're right. And he said, well, I didn't think it would take this long, but I knew you'd call me now. So anyway, we started through the 4th step, and I realized, wow, I really did hate my family. And I had some big resentments against my family. And as far as fear is concerned, I was a scared little boy, just like you said. I would have told you that, I was afraid in Vietnam. There's times when somebody tried to beat me to death on the street when I was a cop. I was afraid, but it was okay. But that wasn't where I was afraid. I was afraid you were going to love me. I was afraid you wouldn't. I was afraid I hurt your feelings. I was afraid I didn't. I was afraid of everything, and I operated off fear. And fear ran my life. And I didn't know that until I did that 4th step. So, and don't get me wrong, I still, I know when I'm afraid, and I feel it. And some of the decisions I make, some of the things I say, is purely because I'm afraid. And I have to back off and say, okay, wait a minute. But once I recognized that fear, it was like it lifted me. it's like, okay, it's okay to be afraid, but not operate out of that fear. It's okay to deal with people, but when you're afraid of them, you need to back off. So anyway, we did the list for the fourth step. And it was, most of my family, some people that I worked with, that my behavior was just out of line. And most of it was my mouth. I thought I was funny, and I wasn't. And I was more hurtful than funny, and I would say to people that, well, I'm just being honest. And it was hurtful, It wasn't honest. It was, anyway, I hurt people. So we made a list of people up to the fourth step. Then we came to the fifth step. And most of you, if you've not been to the fifth step yet, are going to go, I don't want to do that. I recommend it. Because it was the first time in my life that I felt free. Now, don't get me wrong. I mean, eventually I was going to have to talk to some of these people and say, you know what, I was never advised to say I'm sorry. Only, I did this, I believe it did this to you, and I hope I will never do it again. But I'm sorry, it meant nothing. I was a knee-jerk apologist. If you'd say good morning, I'd say I'm sorry. Anything to cover my face. So anyway, he said, what I'd like you to do is sit down with me and we'll do your fist. So we made an appointment, and I went to do it. When I walked in the house, he had candles lit at a table, and we sat down, and I'm like, okay. And he said, just trust me, please. He said, what I want you to do is take this to heart and understand that this is very serious. But I also want you to understand that there's a lifting to it, and that's why there's the candles here. He said the candles just represent that all of this is going to go away. It's just going to lift. And I want you to feel that. And he said, just trust me and we'll do this. So we went through the fifth step, and about a quarter of the way through it, he said to me, oh, I forgot to mention this, and I've said this to people I've heard their fifth steps. He says, there's something in here that you're not going to tell me. There's something in your life that you will not tell anyone. And he said, that something will cause you to drink. I swear. He said, I've seen it happen. And he said, so I held this something back from my sponsor, and I almost drank. And my sponsor finally said, you know what, you got to get it off your chest because you're miserable. And I did. And he said, this is my something. And as soon as he was done, I said, this is mine. Because he made me feel like that it was okay. And as it turns out, it wasn't all that bad anyway. But it is something that just haunted me. And so, again, if you've not done your fifth step, and there's something there that you think is so horrible, probably it isn't. And if you don't talk about it, if you don't get it out, the old timers used to say, if you don't do a fifth, you're going to drink a fifth. Once you do that fifth step, all of a sudden you feel like, I'm not a part anymore. I'm not alone anymore. I've joined the group, whatever. I'm part of AA. And I've accomplished that much that I feel like I'm at home. And it did for me. And then he said, the book says, go home and do your sixth and seventh step. Go home and review what you've done. And if there's anything you left out, get a hold of your sponsor. Go ahead and get a hold of your sponsor and tell him. So I went home and I did the sixth and seventh step. He called Bill and I said, I did this and this is what I did, and I didn't leave anything out. He said, fine, we're on the eighth step. And I said, that's all? And he said, yeah, you're going to revisit those steps, I'll guarantee it. But right now you're good. So we did an 8-step list. Now, most people with the 8-step list, you'll narrow it down to 8 or 9 people. There were probably 12 people on mine, and 5 of those people were dead. But that hatred for those people was something I needed to get rid of. And you've heard this before. I wrote a letter to each one of them. 2 of them I had no idea where they were buried because I had written them out of my life. So I went to a park and sat down and read it to them. And I went to the graves of the other ones. One of the persons was my father. I had resented him for 40-some years because he died and left me with the problems that my mother had. The other one was my mother. I was mean to her about her drinking, and I became an alcoholic. And I went to the grave and I didn't read an apology. I just said, Mom, I did this and I did that. And I'm sorry, I know how much you love me. And I think I hated you for a while. And I'm sorry. You didn't deserve it. Anyway, and then I went to my children. And so, I know I'm on the 9th step, but it's hard to separate them. But on the 9th step, my oldest son said, you know what? You're drinking. It hurt you a lot worse than it hurt me. And I'm just glad you're sober. One of my sons didn't want to hear it. And it was like a year and a half later when he finally said, Dad, I think we should talk. And the rest of them, I made my amends and talked to each one of them. I think we were closer for that because I told them about how vulnerable I had been and how neglectful I had been. And I didn't beat them or slap them around, but I wasn't present a lot. There were a lot of things that I missed. My excuse was the job, but part of it was, even though I wasn't working, I wasn't there. And they understood that. And we're all close now. And 3 of them have named kids after me, so I'm guessing they don't. Or they don't have the imagination. And then, so when I did the amends, and this was different for me, and so each one does it differently. But as an example, I would sit down and talk to Bill, and we would decide what that amends was going to be and how I was going to do it. I would call him and make an appointment. And then before I walked in the door, because I tend to go off script, haven't you noticed? And he'd call me and say, okay, we're going to say a prayer. And we'd say a prayer on the phone. And then he would say, do you feel focused? Do you know what you're going to say? I say, yes. Remember that you're going to say, this is what I did, this is what it cost you. Do you have anything to say? And what's the solution? Not that I won't do that again. I hope I won't do that again. And then let them talk. But once they're done, it's not a debate. Just say thank you and go home. And then call me. And then he'd say, I don't hear an ambulance in the background, so I think it went well. And I finished all of my amends that way. And for me, it was very helpful because I had thought I was an honest person and I was forthright. And I was to a degree. But my amends was not meant to hurt you. It was meant to just say, this is my side of the street. Not you did this and I did that. It was, yes, we had a disagreement, but my reaction to what you did was not right. It was wrong. Now, one of the people said, you know what, I've owed you this for a long time. I was wrong too, and I precipitated this. I started this. And when they were finished, I just said, well, thank you, and left. I didn't debate it. It felt good that they said that, but that was the end of it. And then the 10th step and the 11th step, I love those. It's like I get to review the day in the 11th step. I get to look at my life each day, sometimes an hour at a time. And I learned in the 11th step that something that I never learned before. Do you know that you can stop your day and make it better and move on? I was the kind of person that would get up and say, shoot, what a rotten day. Well, it'll be better tomorrow. And then I'd be miserable for 24 hours. Hey, if you look at the 11th step, it says you can stop at any time and say, you know what? man, this is wonky. This is going in the wrong direction. Please help me stop. Turn around. Where do you want me to go? Because this is not where I should be. And I can have a better day. Wow. I never thought that. So, I love AA. It's been good to me. I tried it. I try to do what I can in the 12th step to help people. I don't sponsor much anymore, and that doesn't hurt my feelings or anything. It just, that's not the way it is. My job seems to be to facilitate, or to speak, or tear down tables, or whatever. Some of you are sponsors, and you're good sponsors, and good for you. And that's what you do. Others, do what you can to pass on the word. And a lot of that is that, there's an old saying in churches, you might be the only Bible that someone will read. You might be the only big book anyone will ever see. So people watch you, you know that, right? I was at a breakfast with some people I worked with last week, was what made me think of this. And one of the guys looked at me and said, and he still calls me Sergeant, but anyway, he said, Sergeant, you're different. What's different about you? And I said, well, I wasn't different. And he said, no, I'm serious, don't joke. And I said, okay. He said, there's something about you, you're more peaceful or something. And I said, how so? And he said, well, when I used to work for you, when I walked into your office, I never knew if I was going to get good Ted or bad Ted. And I said, well, and the guy sitting next to him said, well, Ted's been in AA for 20-some years. He doesn't drink anymore. And this guy said, really? So, they're watching you, and you're different. And that's a good thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're more comfortable with yourself. Life is smoother. You're more serene. I know I've talked a long time. I want to do something before I go. There's a little book that's, I don't know if any of you, it's called The Best of Bill. Has anyone ever read it? I recommend it. And in this is Bill W., not Bill O. So I don't know this guy, I've read the book. So in the book, what they've done is that Bill Wilson was a prolific writer, and he wrote some of the best stuff. Well, he wrote the big book. They edited it. You can get it if you go to the Central in Lansing. There's a copy of the original big book, and if you look at it, most of it was never edited. He wrote the book, and they edited some of it. Bill was a lot like me, or a lot like my sponsor. I would tell him, John, earlier, that I get so excited about trying to help you that sometimes I'm pushing you away and I don't mean to. But this has really been good to me because it's my life. I should be dead a long time ago by nothing else than my own stupidity, but I should be. Somehow, Providence didn't take me. And I'm grateful for that. I don't know everybody else is, but I am. But anyway, he was quite the wreck. But what I didn't know about Bill is that he suffered from depression, severe depression. And he would go into these depressive states even after he was sober, to where he couldn't function. And so he addresses that, and I really do recommend this because some of the stuff it talks about, it's what he wrote to the Grapevine. And I don't know if most of you probably are aware of the Grapevine, and it's the AA magazine. If you've not read it, I recommend it. Because it has ideas in it, but it has stories in it. And many of these stories, any one of you can write a story for the Grapevine, and many times they'll publish it. They might edit it a little bit. I don't know what kind of writers you are, but they love to hear it from us. I use a lot of words that aren't necessary. Either that or I write like a cop, they walked across the street. Only the facts, man. So the book talks about, he writes about faith, about fear, humility, love, anonymity, and then it tells you the story about love. But these are all words that we use, and he defines them. But the one that I read and brought it to me was, he wrote about love. And I thought it was about, the giving of love and all of that. But what it was is that he learned that love was the cure to his depression. Now, I'm a depressive person. Didn't realize it, but I am. And Kayla noticed it every now and then. All of a sudden, I go somewhere. And she'll say, "Where are you?" And I've learned to come back by saying, "Oh," and talk. But after my wife died, there were days and weeks that I was in this state, and it was depression. Bill says that he believed that the 12 steps should be able to help him. Why weren't the 12 steps helping him? He couldn't understand it. They helped him to stay sober. Why can't they help me with my depression? So he began to look at it. And one of the things he always talks about is prayer. He believed in prayer. Okay? And, some people will say, well, okay, what does that do? Well, if nothing else, it focuses you. It gets you to focus on the problem. Now, some of us believe that prayer goes somewhere, and there's someone, somewhere that helps us. I'm not asking you to believe that, but he felt that there was someone, God, he always referred to God, that would answer his prayers. Didn't always know how, but he knew that they would do that. So first he tried that, but then he began to observe, as he writes here, and that was, there are other people in AA that they're emotionally mature, but I'm not. I still have these depressions, and I don't understand why. So he looked at some of the newer people in AA. So he said, I looked at someone that was 6 months into the program, they'd been in long enough, they understood it, and I'm watching them, and they're saying, there's a person that needs me, and they go and work with them, and give them the program, and do whatever they can to help them get sober. But that person, they don't want it, and they walk away. But he looks at this sponsor, that doesn't bother them a bit. They now focus on someone else and say, can I help you? And he said, I'm watching this, and they're helping these people. So some people take the help, and some people even return love to him or her. But others will say, well, I'll take the help, but they go and love somebody else. But this person is never bothered by that. They still reach out to another person. And Bill said, in my life, when I started this, he said for months and weeks, think about the stories, there was probably 8-10 months he was going to hospitals, he was going to doctor's offices, he was going to churches saying, I have this program. I have this program that will help you stay sober. I'm sober now, and I found a spirit in the world. And look at me, and they're going, oh yeah, that's really nice. So we go somewhere else. And he said, I realized, you know what? There was a price to my love. And that was, I loved you so I could get something back. I was using your love and my help for you so I could support me. And I'm going into these depressions. And I'm looking at that saying, wow, that's why I go into these depressions. All of a sudden, it's all about me. What can I do for you so I get something out of it? And that comes from Bill W. And yet, he knew enough to write it and say, this is me, and this is what I recommend, is that the people in AA, and the people that I know, and the people that are happy, they help you. They have no strings attached. Their joy is they were able to give you the program. Their joy is they stay sober. Their joy is they feel people's love, and they're grateful for that. But that's just a byproduct. They're not looking for it. So anyway, I like being sober. That's why I keep going.